Welcome to the weekend episode of the Federalist Files. On today's show, the Texas power grid story, the maligning of an American patriot. President of France warns citizens of American education system. New COVID bill adds extra nonsense spending. And finally, poll numbers from the intolerant Generation Z.
The biggest thing, though, is you remember when you and I, I shouldn't say it that way as you remember, but when you and I talked last, we talked about it's one thing to have the vaccine, which we didn't have when we came into office, but
Viewers and listeners, I greatly appreciate you tuning in. What you just listened to is a little short clip from the town hall that Biden had on CNN earlier this week. That is him stating that we did not have any vaccines when he came in to the president's seat. And here up on the screen, this is him getting the vaccination before he was declared the president on January 20th. So obviously it's erroneous. There was a lot of gaffes during this town hall for lack of time. I'm not really going to show everything I had. I was watching one earlier where a woman asked him about eliminating the student debt, and he told her that we weren't going to. And then I've also been reading some rumblings behind the scenes. Apparently, the Biden administration, because of the new COVID relief spending bill, there's going to be a reconciliation of the bill. It looks like they're not going to be able to pass through that $15 minimum wage because of the reconciliation. I'm not really exactly sure how the particulars work and how it goes with the reconciliation, whether they have to look through the bill with the Republican Party and figure out what to cut out and what not to. But there is a little bit of information on spending at the very end of this special I will be going over. Now, first I wanted to start everything off. The Texas power grid story. Now, this is something that's been very controversial because the media has made it political, as well as the politicians. I know Ted Cruz is getting Ted Cruz somehow has been, while Ted Cruz has been scorned fully, Andrew Cuomo has been almost absolved of his responsibility while being currently probed by the federal government. So he's under investigation now for everything that happened in the nursing home policy that he instilled and implemented. And there's a lot of information coming out about that as well. There's a couple of these watchdog groups that are saying and trying to confirm and trace these COVID cases going from these facilities into these nursing homes. They're able to, at this point, figure out the number of people that have passed away in these nursing homes, and they're saying it's into the hundreds or the thousands because of these Andrew Cuomo implemented policies and this hiding of information. And now what the big story is that's been perpetuated is that Ted Cruz left to go to some sort of vacation in Cancun. Now, that being said, it would be a little different if Ted Cruz was governor, if he was a mayor. I'm not the apologist for Ted Cruz politically. Yeah, it's probably a stupid move. The optics of it are terrible. But if he was a governor or a mayor in an executive position, it would kind of make more sense. It would make a lot less sense to leave, and it would make more sense of the scorn and the crackdown that he's getting from the media right now. But him being a senator, his power is, and this is federalism, this is things that liberals don't know about, the actual core functions of our government. He is a senator. He represents the federal power. So he really doesn't even he represents the state, but his power is of the federal jurisdiction. So him being there in Texas is useless. He will just... There's no reason for him to be there if he doesn't. I mean, if you were in that position and you can get out, would you get out? Yes. Ted Cruz, for the optics, it looked terrible for him to do it. But do you really blame him? Especially considering he's not a mayor or a governor. But I'm not going to sit here, like I said, and apologize. I'm not going to be the apologist and absolve Ted Cruz of blame. I know a lot of Republicans are falling for the trap, or the conservatives are falling for the trap of criticizing Ted Cruz. I just don't really care enough. We're more interested in fixing problems in the conservative side, where people were dying in New York, and it seems like the media now suddenly is going to start reporting this, and they were completely negligent before on it. So this Texas power grid story, to start, I have the Texas Tribune. I have them as a source, as well as I have a very interesting but a not surprising, and I was already aware of this, not surprising piece from the I think it's from the Federalist. I believe. Yes, it is. It's from the Federalist. I'm trying to pull it up right now. I'm having some issues with my notes. Okay, so out of the Texas Tribune, written by Aaron Douglas, this piece, it starts out, the outages during this storm far exceeded what ERCOT, which ERCOT is the electrical company that runs the state electrical power grid in Texas, had predicted in November for an extreme winter event. The forecast for peak demand was 67 gigawatts. Peak usage during the storm was more than 69 gigawatts Sunday, so there's a disparity. It's estimated that about 80% of the power grid's capacity, or 67 gigawatts, could be generated by natural gas, coal, and some nuclear power. Only 7% of the forecasted winter capacity, or 6 gigawatts, was expected to come from various wind sources across the state. Woodfin said Tuesday, and Woodfin is a representative from ERCOT, their power structure, their power grid private company, said Tuesday that 16 gigawatts of renewable energy generation, mostly wind generation, are offline, and that 30 gigawatts of thermal sources, which include gas, coal, and nuclear energy, are offline. And he stated, it appears that a lot of the generation that has gone offline today has been primarily due to issues on the natural gas system, Woodfin said during a Tuesday call with reporters. So, and there's always a, what's the way to explain it? The media, there's always a way in which they position. You have a disparity all around. The renewable energy, such as nuclear, nuclear is renewable. They don't really consider it as renewable. So I'm going to consider renewable as 25% of the grid over in Texas, or I think it's 23% of the grid, 25% is renewable, as in it is solar and is wind, mostly wind. I think 23% of that 25 is wind, and I think I'm going to have a chart on that later. And the other 2 is solar. From what I read, solar completely was out the very first day, because if you have snow covering the panels, they're useless. The solar power can't, and to begin with, 2% on solar power isn't a substantial enough to compensate for the disparity to begin with. Now, you had, from this article directly says, the 16 gigawatts of renewable energy generation, mostly wind generation, which is true, they were offline. It's completely. So there was 0 coming from the wind generation, and that was the main problem. So there was problems from both as well. There's natural gas issues having to do with the pressure from the natural gas systems. And the real problem here really doesn't have much to do with whether you go wind or you go natural gas or oil. The real problem is nothing was winterized over in Texas. They did not winterize the systems. They did not pay extra money and do their due diligence to ensure the people, if there ever was to be a contingency, that they would be covered and insured. The problem is there was not a winterization of these windmills, as well as the natural gas system and the pipes. So production of natural gas in the state has plunged, making it difficult for power plants to get the fuel necessary to run the plants. Natural gas power plants usually don't have very much fuel storage on site, experts said. Instead, the plants rely on the constant flow of natural gas from pipelines that run across the state from areas like the Permian Basin in West Texas to major demand centers like Houston and Dallas. Now, the most important thing to take away from this here is that they have been less and less reliant on natural gases because they have these renewable resources, and they also have many different sources of energy. And Texas is the energy capital of the country. They have been blessed with a lot of natural resources in that area. Because they don't have natural gas on file just sitting there saved up in some sort of a tank, and they get a constant flow coming from West Texas, when those pipes go to freeze, that means you have absolutely nothing. You can't even use a storage unit because you don't have anything in storage. So it is possible, and this is where we get to the winterizing part. It is possible to winterize natural gas plants, natural gas production, and wind turbines, experts said, which prevents such major interruptions in other states with more regular extreme winter weather. But even after upgrades were made after the 2011 winter storm, many Texas power generators have still not made all the investments necessary to prevent these sorts of disruptions happening to the equipment, experts say. ERCOT directors also said that the storm this week took a turn in the early morning hours of Monday, when extremely low temperatures forced many more generators offline than ERCOT had anticipated. And this is Woodfin, the representative. This is what he had to say about it. And I quote, "It appeared that the winterization we were doing was working, but this weather was more extreme than past storms. The loss of generation during the morning of Monday after midnight was really the part that made this a more extreme event than we had planned." So up here on the screen now, I'm going to have it, as you can see, you got 2% of the power grid is made solar, 11% is nuclear, 18% is coal, 23% is wind, and 46% is natural gas. Our main problem, and I'm going to get to this in the Federalist piece here, and he talks about it, Jason Isaac. Well, the main problem is an overdependency of some of these renewable resources. And because of that, there was nothing on file. There was no extra natural gas resources. There's been a lower dependence on coal because it's supposed to be burning dirtier, apparently. Nuclear, that apparently something happened where nuclear, same thing, the system wasn't, I think 3 out of the 4 nuclear plants were working. One of them had some sort of random issue that had nothing to actually do with the winter. They probably just don't run the nuclear plants all the time. So when they went to run it, maybe there was some sort of issue that they didn't handle beforehand. This is a huge mishap by the Texas to begin with. This is a huge mishap by this Texas energy company. Obviously, this is a once in 100-year scenario. This has not happened in 100 years. It is difficult to be prepared for something like that when you're really not expecting it and you want to make cuts to the budget. But this is a real-life scenario where I think something like 40 people so far have died from freezing, or from whether it was carbon monoxide because they're keeping their cars on while also keeping their garage closed, which is something that you're not supposed to do. And it's being politicized heavily to say, oh, well, natural gas is the problem mostly, and then, oh, well, clean energy is the problem. Really what the problem is there was no winterizing of either one. And when it actually came down to it, natural gas still worked a little bit. The wind power was completely shut down in its entirety, even though it was, both of them were not winterized. So natural gas actually still did work. If it weren't for natural gas, they would have had absolutely nothing to live off of. And then another thing that I also read additionally was that these batteries from wind power, they lost 60% of their power because when it gets cold like that, the battery is unable to hold as much power as it was before. So they lost 60% of their battery life as well. But the most important part is the real problem behind all of this, the government subsidizing renewable energy, and it causing an over-reliance on that system, and they were not prepared. They weren't winterized to begin with, and they were also just not prepared for this contingency scenario. So this Federalist piece, written by Jason Isaac, he starts off, he says, fossil fuels aren't to blame. There are misleading reports asserting the blackouts were caused by large numbers of natural gas and coal plants failing or freezing. Here's what really happened. The vast majority of our fossil fuel power plants continued running smoothly, just as they do in far colder climates across the world. Power plant infrastructure is designed for cold weather and rarely freezes, unlike wind turbines that must be specially outfitted to handle extreme cold. It appears that ERCOT, Texas's grid operator, was caught off guard by how soon demand began to exceed supply. Failure to institute a managed rolling blackout before the grid frequency fell to dangerously low levels meant some plants had to shut off to protect their equipment. This is likely why so many power plants went offline, not because they had failed to maintain operations in the cold weather. Yet these operational errors overshadow the decades of policy blunders that made these blackouts inevitable. Thanks to market distorting policies that favor and subsidize wind and solar energy, Texas has added more than 20,000 megawatts of those intermittent resources since 2015, while barely adding any natural gas and retiring significant coal generation. So from what I've read, natural gas is actually less carbon emissions than coal. Coal apparently has the highest yields of carbon emissions. Additionally, this rolling blackout idea, this is actually, what happened was they assumed there was going to be this much power being used. What happened was the people ended up needing more power because they were keeping the heat on in their houses at this time. And this is an assumption that this usually does not happen in the winter for Texans. They don't need to keep their heat on because it's usually not cold in Texas. Additionally, this is something that they implemented in California. The idea, you guys want this renewable, this idea of an all-around renewable resources in solar and wind power. There's a lot of variables to think about when implementing this plan. To begin with, if you have wind power coming through and you're charging up batteries, how are you going to transport that wind power from one place to another? You're going to need a car or a giant battery truck to get it from one place to another. Are you going to use oil in that truck, or are you going to somehow power that electrically as well? Additionally, to build up these batteries, there needs to be a deep drilling into the Earth's core to get some of the elements in order to make this. Manganese, for example, is one of the elements, nickel as well. That is also damaging to the environment to an extent. I don't know exactly how much because I haven't deeply studied it, but I know it is also damaging. They tried to implement this same policy in California, and during the summer they had to have rolling blackouts where the governor came out and told them not to use their electricity and shut off the air. Do you want to live in a society where you can't use the heat or the air because of the idea of carbon emissions, whereas the entire world is doing whatever they want, and America currently is cutting down on carbon emissions? Over the last 4 years, we've seen a 9% cut in American carbon emissions. And we've been using, obviously, the same amount of power, if not more. So we're doing a good job. Free market incentives, we are doing a good job in achieving that through the free market, rather than signing up for some Texas or some Paris climate accord, which, by the way, is unconstitutional because treaties have to be passed through the Congress, and it was never passed through the Congress. So essentially, it's just like another executive order. But this is what you will be living in if you have an over-reliance on one system over the other. If this was the scenario where they had 100% energy that was wind energy, and even as the Federalist article here cites, if you wanted to have all wind energy, even when winterized, still in extremely cold weather, you're still going to have issues with those wind turbines. And additionally, if there is no wind, then those wind turbines will probably yield less power. I don't exactly know specifically how they work in terms of wind. So if you're expecting a yield on a windy day of 100, let's just say 100 megawatts, whereas if it's not as windy, you're only going to see 50 megawatts. So you're going to experience rolling blackouts all of the time. It's going to be a regular occurrence if you want to go to completely renewable energy. Now, the one source of renewable energy that is highly effective, highly efficient, and actually found to be very safe, with the exception of 3 scenarios in the entire world in its history, is nuclear power. There's the 3 Mile Island, I don't remember, somewhere in Japan, I can't remember the name, and then in Russia it happened as well. And there's a lot of different safety protocols to take, and it's from what I've read, it seems like it is the safest alternative that yields the best results in terms of its efficiency. So next he goes on here. He states, Yet ERCOT still should not have been surprised by this event, as its own long-term forecast indicated it was possible even in the winter, although many wind turbines did freeze and total wind generation was at 2% of installed capacity Monday night. Overall wind production at the time the blackouts began was roughly in line with ERCOT forecasts from the previous week. We knew solar would not produce anything during the night when demand was peaking. Intermittency is not a technical problem, but a fundamental reality when trying to generate electricity from wind and solar. This is a known and predictable problem, but Texas regulators fooled themselves into thinking that the risk of such low wind and solar production at the time it was needed most was not significant. So they really, at the end of the day, they got nothing in this storm scenario here from wind and solar. Special breaks helped cause the blackout. This is what he's saying. And this is the free market incentives here. Research by the Texas Public Policy Foundation, LIFE, Powered Project found that more than $80 billion of our tax dollars have been spent on wind and solar subsidies in the last decade. In federal subsidies alone, Texans are also charged an average of $1.5 billion a year in state subsidies for renewable energy. All that cash hasn't materially changed our energy landscape. Wind and solar still provide just 4% of our energy nationwide. The promise that subsidies would kickstart renewable energy technology remains unmet after more than 40 years. So we've been giving these huge subsidies to clean energy, or they call them clean energy. It's not necessarily, like I said, the way that the batteries are built, it's not necessarily clean, it's cleaner maybe. Now, more than $80 billion of our tax dollars every single year to the federal government go to these subsidies for clean energy, and then they only make up 4% of our energy nationwide, which is just, it's laughable. Renewable advocates will be quick to point out that fossil fuels also receive subsidies from the federal government. That's partially true, but solar companies receive 75 times more money and wind 17 times more per unit of electricity generated. Nevertheless, the best solution for Texans and all Americans would be to eliminate all energy subsidies and allow the free market to drive our energy choices. As politically popular as wind and solar energy are, no amount of greenwashing can cover up their fundamental unreliability and impracticality for any other than a supplemental energy source. Yet our government, even in the oil country of Texas, home of Spindletop and the Permian Basin, is designed to incentivize renewable energy projects. Yeah, so we're setting up a system where we're designing, and it's just funny because you see all these celebrities, they go fly private, they do whatever they want. Same thing with the politicians. It's do as I say, not as I do. And then we're sitting here through our tax dollars paying for all this renewable stuff. And to begin with, me personally, every single time the government makes this huge deal out of something and says the world's going to end in 12 years, my first thought is this is all a power grab. These are things, they want to implement these policies so they can take more rights away from you. They can take more of your money away from you, because then you have a heavier reliance on the government. Anytime where the government says we are in great peril and we need some sort of group think and group idea, and group, like wearing a mask is somehow patriotic, and they try to make things like that renewable energy is a patriotic thing, as if all of us aren't individuals that have our own individual rights and cannot make our own individual decisions and threat analyses. They make it like suddenly when they say, "Oh, we hate all of you, we hate conservatives, we hate your guts," and I'm gonna have a small section on this today on Rush Limbaugh and how much they hate his guts. They hate all your guts, but then suddenly we want you to wear a mask. We're all together. We're all in this together. Wear a mask. Be patriotic for your country. That's now the argument. So next, he goes on. The consequences are potentially deadly. For all the talk of climate change, cold is far deadlier than heat. Responsible, and listen to this, cold is far deadlier than heat. Responsible for 20 times more deaths. Although the cold itself may not kill you, you might not literally freeze to death. It has devastating potential to exacerbate pre-existing conditions and make otherwise minor illnesses life-threatening. It's a reality far too many know firsthand, as a recent study found. Increasing natural gas utility prices led to an increase in wintertime deaths as they force families to choose between putting food on the table and paying the heat bill. In this health conscientious era of the COVID-19 crisis, this should be enough to pause any policy discussion that might inhibit electricity access. So this most relates and this most affects the middle class worker or the lower middle class worker, because now they have to make decisions because of subsidies from the government. You're paying more and more taxes. You have to make decisions. Am I going to keep the heat on tonight, or am I going to put food on the table? That's why when there's government subsidies, you always have to remember the subsidies are coming from you, the people. So remedies that he has, just a short section of remedies that the writer has here. What's his name again? If I can find him. Jason Isaac. These are remedies that he has. The Texas legislature and other states hoping to avoid similar messes should act decisively to protect our electrical grid in a few specific ways. First, they should require all electric generation to be dispatchable or readily available. And it wasn't in this case, meaning generators guarantee a certain amount of power will be available at all times. No more should we tolerate wind turbines pumping out a measly 2% of their capacity and leaving Texas families in the cold. That was another thing that I read too, is that some of these wind turbines, they were direct links. They weren't actually saving and storing anything in any battery. So once they shut off, then everyone's power just shuts off and there's no type of reserve in the back burner. Second, they should end subsidies for both renewable and traditional energy sources. Research by the Texas Public Policy Foundation explains extensively the problem with energy subsidies, including distorting markets without improving technology or shifting our energy landscape in the slightest. Rather than wasting tax dollars trying and failing to pick winners and losers, lawmakers should allow the free market to work. Finally, they should work to discourage the discriminatory practice of environmental, social, and governance investing, which prioritizes political correctness over fiduciary duty and places workers' and retirees' futures at risk. Texas and several other states will file legislation soon to prohibit companies that boycott or divest from fossil fuels from doing business with the government. It's a good start to ensure this energy discrimination campaign doesn't infiltrate state pensions and investments. So and that's actually interesting. I never even thought about this. Investment opportunities in gas and oil as well as pensions. So there's an open. They've done a study on this from what it looks like. The Texas Policy Foundation has found from research that clean energy causes blue-collar workers to make less money, which I've been arguing for these last couple of episodes, because the yield of power is not enough to pay for these pensions of these workers or to even pay them a good wage, which it all makes sense. You are creating a product that the yield of energy and power is less. It all makes sense. Now next, what I have is and maybe I'll quickly just look into this. I'm not going to put them all up on the screen just because I don't really want to give them much thought, but I have Rush Limbaugh. I have a lot of celebrities were ripping on Rush Limbaugh. Rest in Piss was the tag on Twitter that was trending this week. He passed away from cancer. And now I have Amber Timblin. I don't even know who that is. David Cross. John Cusack. That's a pretty prominent name. Rosanna Arquette. Ron Perlman, the guy that plays Hellboy, and he's also... he's in Sons of Anarchy, I think. Bette Midler, Billy Eichner, Billy Baldwin, George Takei, Larry Charles. These are all famous people. Some of them I know, some of them I do not. Michael Rappaport, that's another one. They're all ripping. They're all ripping Rush. They're calling him racist. They're calling him all these other things. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this clip, and this is his producer and very, very good friend after his death speaking on Fox News. Play 2.
And, Sean, we can't wrap our arms around this. We can't wrap our brains and our hearts around it, that our beloved Rush has returned his talent to God. And we are so thankful for him. And beyond all of those accomplishments, Rush Limbaugh was one of the finest human beings that you would ever want to meet. A generous, wonderful, beautiful spirit, humble, a gentleman, always, never failed to thank people for the smallest service that they could do to him, never looked down on people. It burns me to my soul when people sully his reputation with falsehoods, calling him a racist. This man was just an incredible phenomenon. And we love you, Rush. God bless you. And thank you, Sean, for having me with you to talk about Rush.
So that's pretty heavy there. That's Bo Snerdley. He was the producer for Rush Limbaugh for a very long time. And he's upset because he's been maligned by the media as well as our celebrity class as a racist. This producer, if you are listening on podcast, Bo Snerdley, is a black man. Which doesn't really matter to conservatives because we don't really care about race politics, but just for the record, for all the leftists out there and the liberals that all they care about is race all the time, this is a black man. This was one of his nearest and dearest friends. It was his producer of his show for a very long time. He didn't work for Rush, he worked with Rush. So that's all. I'm just going to leave that there. Jobless claims unexpectedly jump to 161,000. This is a Breitbart news piece here by John Carney. It starts off, economists had expected claims to fall to 768,000 from the 793,000 initially reported for the prior week. The previous week's figure was revised by 55,000 to 848,000. What we were thinking is the jobless claims were going to fall from what they were at. They have not fallen. They actually rose. They increased to, and the estimation was 768,000. We had 793,000 jobless claims, and it was expected to drop by around 25,000, and it has actually jumped 70,000. So jobless claims can be volatile week to week. So economists like to look at a 4-week average. This fell to 833,250, 3,500 below the prior week's average. So we're just getting what it seems like is it's not getting worse and worse, but it's staying very close. The jobless claims are pretty much the same as they were last month. Jobless claims, which are a proxy for layoffs, remain at extremely high levels. Prior to the pandemic, the highest level of claims was 695,000 hit in October of 1982. In March of 2009, at the depths of the financial crisis recession, jobless claims peaked at 665,000. So this is unprecedented. We have not seen jobless claims like this, probably, if I had to guess, since the Great Depression. And I don't even know if they really recorded that number. So even when the economy is creating a lot of demand for workers, many businesses will shed employees as they adjust to market conditions. But in a high-pressure labor market, those employees quickly find jobs, and many never show up on the employment rolls. What appears to be happening now is that many workers who lose their jobs cannot quickly find replacement work and are forced to apply for benefits, as in benefits through the government. So this is why we're seeing these jobless claims. And it could be because a lot of small businesses were shut down, and once those people lost their jobs, there was no other businesses to go to get a new job. Claims hit a record 6.87 million for the week of March 27th, so I guess that means in total, more than 10 times the previous record, so I guess that's the total federally. Through spring and early summer, each subsequent week has seen claims decline, but in late July, the labor market appeared to stall, and claims hovered around 1 million throughout August, a level so high it was never recorded before the pandemic struck. Claims moved down again in September and had made slow, if steady, progress until the election. Continuing claims, which get reported with a week's lag, fell by 64,000 to 4.4 1.49 million. There are 2 new programs offering unemployment benefits to people previously ineligible, such as self-employed workers or small business owners. The total number of continued weeks claimed for benefits in all programs for the week ending January 30th was 18.34 million, a decrease of 1.3 million from the previous week. So we're making from what it looks like here is we're making a recovery. I don't know how, to what extent. It looks like a pretty slow recovery, and just because of the jobless claims, or maybe these people cannot find jobs. My guess is that the government's giving out unemployment benefits, so there's really not that much of a incentive to go back to work to begin with, is one, and then two, it probably is difficult to find another job at this point. So now what we have is more interesting of a topic, unfortunately. All those other situations that are going on, and this actually is related to it. A lot of people had to probably quit their jobs because they had to stay home to either one parent had to stay home and watch the kids and coordinate to make sure the kid was paying attention to the screen that they are now doing this. They're doing remote schooling. So there's been many questions rolled out by the media about when are kids going to go back to school, because the media personnel, guess what, they are also parents, a lot of them, so they're asking for their own benefit as well. When are the kids going back to school? And so first what I have is a staff member from Kamala Harris's staff, and they ask her, and she just does the dodge technique. Check this out.
That K-8 schools can reopen even if teachers have not been vaccinated.
By the end of the first 100 days, which is around April 30th, the president and vice president do believe that the majority of K-8 schools will be able to be reopened and operating safely.
It's not a trick question, and I feel like you guys have treated it like a trick question. I think people just want to know what the White House position is on whether or not teachers have to be vaccinated for kids to return safely to school.
And the president and vice president believe that teachers should be prioritized for receiving the vaccination.
Prioritize is one thing, and I think there's wide agreement they should be prioritized. Is it necessary, though? That's the question. It really is a yes-no question.
Well, John, I think the real question, frankly, if I can be frank here, is what you're getting to is it safe for kids to go back to school? And the president and vice
actually
president...
not. In this case, that's not the question. The question is it safe for teachers to go back to school?
And I think I was really clear just now that it is the administration's position that teachers should be prioritized for vaccinations.
I'll try one last time. Does the president feel that teachers have to be vaccinated?
The president believes that teachers should be prioritized for vaccination.
All right, I'm not going to get a yes or no.
That is Simone Sanders. She is the chief of staff for Kamala Harris. Does not give a clear, definitive answer. The Biden administration has stood by the teachers' unions on this one, full-fledged, have put the teachers' unions and teachers above the future of America's students and children. And the amount of damage that has been done over these last 2 years to children socially and cognitively has been almost, I'm sure, immeasurable as well as exponential. We will see over the next couple years what the true detriments of the situation will be in future. Probably maybe job numbers, SAT scores, mental and cognitive acuity levels. Next, what I have, and you would think, oh, okay, so Kamala Harris's staff member on school openings, the way she feels, but who's to say? She doesn't speak for Kamala Harris. She doesn't speak for Joe Biden. So next, check out what Kamala Harris has to say on the same subject.
You know, the CDC has said it is not a prerequisite for teachers to be vaccinated for them to go back to school. But many teachers are wary of going back to school. And we've had some cities have to sue the teachers union or sue their own school districts to try to get these schools to reopen. Can you reassure teachers who are listening right now that it is safe for them to go back to school, even if they are not vaccinated, if these public health measures like distancing and masks are being implemented?
So first of all, let me just say this, and the president has said it, and we're all really clear. Teachers should be a priority. Teachers should be a priority. Look, let me just tell you something. I love teachers. My first grade teacher, Mrs. Frances Wilson, attended my law school graduation. Teachers are critical to our children's development. They should be able to teach in a safe place and expand the minds and the opportunities of our children. So teachers should be a priority along with other frontline workers, and we're going to make them a priority. I believe...
I don't want to beat it to death, but I know there are teachers listening, and the CDC has said they don't have to be vaccinated to go back to school. Of course, it's the priority.
We think they should be a priority.
Okay.
We think they should be a priority, and the states are making decisions individually about where they will be on the list of who gets vaccinated. I believe they should be a priority. The president believes they should.
So, in the middle of that clip, I cropped some of it out just for the sake of time. She talks about this new spending plan and how this is going to solve all of the problems that we're having in these school systems in terms of the safety. And really what this is this is just shilling to the teachers' unions. This is all money that's going to get thrown into the program to pay teachers more money. And then that money, in essence, goes to the unions. That's the whole point of it. And she even says here, and she won't definitively, once again, come up with an answer, are the kids, who's the priority here? Are the kids and the children the priority, or the teachers? Because at this point, we are now sacrificing two-parent households of two parents that are working. We're sacrificing one of the incomes that's coming in to watch kids at home and make sure, and really essentially do the job of what the teacher's supposed to be doing. Just for we're prioritizing teachers. And I'm not asking, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree, we're not asking for older at-risk ages to go back to work in teaching, but an average teacher's age in the United States is 44 years old, which is not an at-risk group. So it's very unreasonable that the teachers will not go back to work at this point, and I think this is horrible for the public school programs, as well as it looks even better for private schools. It's gonna show and reflect. I'm sure there's gonna be numbers in the future that will reflect that people unfortunately pulling their kids out of the public school system, sending their kids to a private school. I was actually talking myself personally at my job to somebody else that is moving to Florida, and their kid is getting a scholarship to go to a private school for free. So, and they don't have to worry about the school being shut down. Next topic I have here. France, the president of France warns his country of the radical ideas imported from American institutions. And this is a very interesting piece. This is written on the Daily Wire. It's written by Tim Pierce. And I have one screenshot here. French President Emmanuel Macron warned of certain social science theories entirely imported from the United States in a speech last year, calling for a reinvestment in French education and culture. And notice he doesn't say science, he says social sciences. And then in this piece he talks a little bit about I think he was calling it leftist. They were calling it leftist. I'm trying to think of the exact term that they use in the piece, if I can pull it up and check it out. He's talking about Islamo-leftist ideas. And that is the idea that Islam is beyond reproach. It cannot be questioned. The people that practice the religion cannot be questioned. Just in a general sense, it's really just the woke culture that I think he's referring to when he talks about the social sciences that are being taught in American institutions, and now these are becoming imported to France. And France does actually have a problem with Islamic extremism in certain areas. I think there was those French bombings. There was that French terrorist attack where everyone was saying we stand strong with, I think it was Paris at that time. And it's because they have these weird no-go zones that are ruled by Sharia law. It's a lot to get into where these extremists are. And specifically, what Macron really, he's warning the people is that we have all these crazy, like, for example, in the United States, we have this critical race theory. We have the idea where any type of disparity in terms of criminality rates or in terms of income is somehow automatically attributed to racism of some sort of systemic or systematic force. And there actually is, and you can point to the 70s, there's redlining policies. I'm sure in the history of America, there's a lot of racist things that went on in the history of the United States. But at this current time, they're pointing to ideas of some sort of subliminal racism, things that you legitimately, you cannot put your finger on it. There is no tangible racism going on there that is considered systematic or systemic, but this idea of critical race theory is any type of disparity in terms of whether it is socioeconomic status or it is income or criminality rates. It automatically is attributed to a racist system rather than individual people. So really it's the inherent philosophy that it's the nature versus nurture, that people are bound to do bad things if they grow up in a bad scenario, rather than free will and free thought being the core denominator here. And that's kind of actually a stark comparison between the left and the right. The left believes in groupism. They don't believe really in free will. They believe in group think. That's why there can't be free will when you have a group think and a group ideology where everyone gangs together and has to think the same thing. You cannot deviate from that idea and that subject, or else then you are destroyed because you no longer are enacting with that group thinking ideology, and now you're considered more free will based. And that is really what the right is. The right is about individual rights, individual freedoms, and the right to do whatever you want. And the left is about, you guys have to think as us, and you guys will submit to our authority, and we're going to put our boot on your throat until you submit and bow down to us and bend the knee. And that's really what he's alluding to, Emmanuel Macron. And this is a problem in this goes off to my next article here. It's a New York Post piece written by Rav Aurora. Generation Z, lacking of deep thought. So there's a study, a couple different polls here that he uses to prove his point. And I believe this guy's an actual Rav Aurora, whether it's a guy or a girl. It's a college student that writes this piece, and it's an op-ed. It's very interesting. He starts off, in our increasingly digitized, secular, and ideologically polarized era, my generation, Generation Z, has overwhelmingly turned to political activism in their search for meaning. The rise of BLM protests, climate change rallies, and LGBTQ pride parades over the last half-decade have given young people a religious sense of community and a kind of spiritual mission, that of fighting for equality and justice, which is very interesting. And he's right. Now, politics has become religion, unfortunately, because we have deviated very far away from religion. And it gives these people some sort of purpose in their lives, because we are dealing with deeply flawed and not deranged, but rather, well, they are deranged, but rather depraved individuals. Next, he states, capitalism and all its manifestations are now considered dangerous while advocating for socialism. The new requisite philosophy for entering the cool kids club and this is the socialism, is viewed positively by 61% of Generation Z. A third of young adults polled last year supported abolishing the police more than any other group. Blinded by myopic visions of cultural revolution, some young people even justify violence to do this. One poll showed 64% of college students agreed that last year's anti-police rioting and looting is justified to some degree. And that was the actual question in the poll. Is rioting and looting, is it justified to some degree in the idea of anti-police or social justice? And 64% of college students said yes, it is justified. So they believe in political violence to achieve the means, to achieve the ends. So in their opinion, the ends, no matter what, the means are justified to reach that end, even if it includes violence. This rise of orthodoxy comes with a growing intolerance. Alternate perspectives that deviate from the mainstream aren't just discomforting to young people, they're treated as a mortal threat. Just over 50% of Generation Z college students believe shouting down speakers or trying to prevent them from talking is sometimes or always acceptable. Which makes sense. So they want no discourse, they want no dissent, they want no objecting opinions. 50% of college kids of the Generation Z, they believe that shutting down free speech is justified. At the same time, more than 2/3, 68% of college students say the campus climate prevents them from expressing their true opinions for fear of offending their classmates. Despite the dogma of culturally emboldened young progressives, many Gen Z thinkers actually crave greater diversity of thought. And this is an aspect here that is actually not thought of. Years ago, it was, okay, we'll let these kids be stupid, we'll let these kids act crazy, because when they get into the workplace, this isn't going to go down. This is not going to be allowed. This isn't going to be acceptable. This social justice, this load of heaping trash that has been thrown on the American people and the American psyche. This has now found its way, almost like a cancer, spreading into our institutions, into business, big business, into executive board meetings. This has made its way and has permeated to all of American society. And this is a systemic problem now, and it's an endemic problem as well, that will have to somehow be fixed. And I don't really know at this point how we fix it, other than an acceptance of, through government means, as in some sort of protections on First Amendment speech. I just don't really know how this can be fixed. And it has to start in the culture. The problem is for conservatives, we just hop off Facebook. Conservatives hop off Twitter. They hop off Facebook. They hop off YouTube. They don't care. They'll just hop off. They don't want to have to deal with it. But the chickens will come home to roost, and it will materialize, and we will have these problems. It's not like it's almost like when you have an ailment, and let's say you hurt your leg and you just keep walking on that leg, you stop thinking about it. The broken leg is still there. It's always there, and it just gets worse and worse as you continue to walk on it. And that's what's going on right now, because liberalism has infiltrated our education systems, and we are teaching kids in elementary schools LGBTQ acceptance, LGBTQ being an ally. If you want to teach your own kids that personally, that's fine. If you want to teach kids how to specific behaviors on how to be tolerant to LGBTQ individuals, and you want to teach them about social justice, that's all fine and well. You can do that in your own home, but it should not be up to school systems and the public funded, the government, to tell your kids how to and what to think. That's not how it should go. The reason that kids go to school is it's conducive to their development and their learning. They're not learning anything by learning about LGBTQ issues. They're only learning to look at everything negatively and be very touchy about regular issues or fundamental issues in society. So next what I have is the U.S. House revives a bill to ban goods from Xinjiang, China, amid genocidal concerns. This is a Reuters piece, and I'll get to something right after this. It's going to be a quick clip from Biden, and this is from his town hall as well. The U.S. House of Representatives on Thursday reintroduced a bipartisan bill that would ban imports from China's Xinjiang region unless it is certified they are not produced with forced labor, and allow them further sanctions against Chinese officials responsible for abuses against Muslims. The House bill would authorize the U.S. president to apply sanctions against anyone responsible for labor trafficking of minority Uyghurs or other Muslims in Xinjiang, a leading producer of cotton and cotton products. It would also require financial disclosures by listed U.S. companies about engagement with Chinese firms and entities engaged in abuses, a provision not included in the Senate version. And this is all about having to do with the current genocide that's going on of Muslims over in China. And the UN panel in 2018 received some credible reports that at least 1 million Muslims have been detained in concentration camps. And China denied the abuse and said its camps provide vocational training and are needed to fight extremism. So they think that they're fighting Islamic extremism by holding these people in concentration camps. And there were also, I think there was a lot of rape going on in these concentration camps as well, from what I've read. So there's some really disgusting stuff, and this is a smart move, and I'm surprised that the U.S. legislative branch is doing this. And the only problem is I've been getting very, very mixed signals, which is what I mentioned this before. The Biden administration is saying one thing, or the legislative branch or the media even is reporting that we're so against China, and then Biden is going out there saying something totally different, and then you're reading all these different cases where now telecommunications companies in the United States are allowed back on the market, or telecommunication companies that are derived from the Chinese Communist Party and have deep ties are now allowed back on the New York Stock Exchange, and we're now still trading with them and buying a lot of their goods still, whereas before there were sanctions against doing so from the Trump administration. But then, you have people coming out saying, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do things, and then they don't do anything. But then they turn around and they do things to help China out in our economy. And this is Biden got this question in the town hall, and just check out how he answers it from Anderson Cooper. Play 6.
Just talked to China's president.
Yes, for 2 hours.
What about the Uyghurs? What about human rights abuses?
We must speak up for human rights. It's who we are. We can't. My comment to him was, and I know him well, and he knows me well. We're a 2-hour conversation.
You talked about this to him.
I talked about this too, and that's not so much refugee, but I talked about it. I said, look, Chinese leaders, if you know anything about Chinese history, it has always been the time when China has been victimized by the outer world is when they haven't been unified at home. So vastly overstated, the central principle of Xi Jinping is that there must be a united, tightly controlled China. And he uses his rationale for the things he does based on that. I point out to him, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. And so the idea, I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. I said, and by the way, he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms that each country and their leaders are expected to follow.
So that's his answer. His answer is there's different norms that each president has to follow, and he won't actually, he says, he expects me not to speak up about the Uyghurs. Do you notice how he doesn't get into specifics about exactly what they are doing to the Uyghurs over in China? He just keeps saying the Uyghurs, the Uyghurs, the Uyghurs. The regular listener, the viewer of CNN doesn't know who a Uyghur is. They have no background information on this topic at all, on this subject. I think he ended something where he said China's only strong if it's unified in their view from their president, thus the reason for them taking over Taiwan, taking over all these other countries. And he's just very soft. Even just the language is very soft. Pretty much like kind of, we kind of have an agreement, we know each other, and I'm going to tell him what he's doing is wrong, and that's really it. And some presidents of different countries have different outlooks and on human rights and on their culture. There's cultural differences, so they can kind of do their thing. And this isn't, I guess, the whole idea of like a genocide. When it gets to a genocide, I think it gets to a whole different level. If we're willing to go and fight in the Middle East for we don't even know what, then we should be going and fighting China for genocide at this point. If that's the standard that we're going to go by and what wars we get over and get into and what wars we don't get into, if there's a genocide going on in China and we're getting into wars in the Middle East and we don't really even know why we're getting in wars in the Middle East, we might as well go get into war with China too. And I'm not a huge war advocate, but I would like to see from the representative of the United States and the executive branch head, I would like to see stronger condemnation of China, me personally. So new COVID legislation contains a $300 billion deal in unrelated spending. And this is the new coronavirus relief bill. $300 billion of unrelated spending. It is from the Foundation for Economic Freedom, written by Brad Palumbo. It starts off, President Biden has not backed down from the $1.9 trillion COVID-19 spending proposal, and House Democrats are pushing full steam ahead on making his vision a legislative reality but a top budget watchdog just warned that the budget busting legislation, which costs roughly around $13,260 per federal taxpayer, is full of spending that has nothing to do with the pandemic. So just think about this. This is costing the average taxpayer $13,260. But the payment that you're going to be getting from this is what, $1,200 or $1,400? Yeah, you're going to be getting a $1,400 payment from this. How is it that you're getting maybe around, what is that, around 1/12 of what the actual, it's less than one, it's a little bit more than 1/11. It's between 1/11 and 1/12 of $13,260. So you're paying $13,260, and the government is taking it. They're just, rolling it up into a crumpled ball. And while they're doing this, they're tearing off pieces, and then they're handing it back to you, and it's $1,400. So it continues. The Committee for Responsible Budget warned on Wednesday, and I quote, "Only about 1% of our entire package goes towards COVID vaccines, and 5% is truly focused on public health needs surrounding the pandemic. Meanwhile, nearly half of the package will be spent on poorly targeted rebate checks and state and local government aid, including to households and governments that have experienced little or no financial loss during this crisis." The most important part about this is that the government is trying to cash in on you, the taxpayer, right now. You are paying half of this bill. Half of the $1.9 trillion is going to state and local governments and households that don't need this money. The government is cashing in on you after closing your business down, shutting you down from being able to work, and they're saying, and this is what happens when there is an over-reliance on government. This is what happens when you trust the government and you back down to whatever they tell you to do, and you are in lockstep with the government. This is how they treat you. They shut you out from your job. They stop you from gaining an income for months on end, and then they pay you out a $1,400 paycheck after taking $13,000 away from you, and then whatever would have been taken away from you from working yourself. Even some of the money that is ostensibly related to COVID-19, like billions intended to help schools reopen, is highly misleading. For example, as the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget Senior Policy Director Mark Goldwine notes, much of this money for school reopening is actually allocated for 2023 and 2024, long past when all schools will have been reopened. So they're going this money, and this was known. This money is going to teachers and teachers unions, or it's going to some sort of state and local government to be redirected into different programs that are completely unrelated to schools. And if they are related to schools, they're pushing back what it's actually for, 2023 and 2024. That is 2 years from now, this funding. So this is just a big government grab of your money, and Americans are going to be willing to take this because they're going to get a $1,400 paycheck when they're getting $13,000 taken away from them, because there's the cognitive dissonance of not actually knowing what the government is doing with your money, because you listen to these left-wing sources that lie straight to your face all the time, just like your government officials do. More broadly, the committee reports that at least $300 billion of the bill's spending, 15% of the bill, is allocated towards long-standing policy priorities that have no direct relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are things that are unrelated to actual relief for us. For actual substantive relief, $300 billion are allocated to that. It goes on here. The president of the CRFB states, and I quote, "The bill includes a number of other long-standing priorities, such as expanding the child tax credit and earned income tax credit, increasing Affordable Care Act subsidies, and boosting the minimum wage. These policies don't belong in a COVID relief package and should be fully offset if retained. The Congress would co-opt the COVID-19 crisis to push partisan priorities and hand out wasteful slush funds will understandably appall many Americans, but it shouldn't really come as a surprise. Washington's propensity for waste, cronyism, and profligacy is no secret at this point." the most important part to take from this, especially this very last part, they use these bills, they call them omnibus packages, and the last one was 5,500 pages, the last bill in December. And what they do is they hold the people hostage, they hold their COVID relief hostage, the relief that people actually need, which only accrues to around 400 billion of this 1.9 trillion. So it's maybe estimatably it's around a fourth of this actual bill is getting given back to the people in those $1,400 paychecks, and the rest is, that's all that should be passed. If that's what's needed, whatever goes directly to the people, that is it itself. But what the government does, and whether it's Democrat or Republican, usually Democrats love spending money, Republicans like spending money too, but I think Democrats like spending money more at this point. They will lump in, it's the idea, don't ever let a tragedy go to waste, so they will hold this money hostage, and they will lump in other liberal or left-wing policies such as the $15 minimum wage or subsidies for Obamacare, things that have nothing to do with this COVID relief, and they'll lump all that in, and then they'll expect a vote on it, and if the Republicans shut it down, then the media will carry the water for the Democrat Party, and they will blame and condemn the Republicans for shutting down a bill because it gave relief to the American people. The amount of relief that it gave to the American people was not enough. You took $13,000 from each of us, and you're going to give us each back $1,400. That's not fair. That is not that's not helping the people. It's not true relief as they characterize it. So, and that'll actually, surprisingly, that brings me to my headlines. So I'm almost done here. What I have is I have a couple very interesting headlines. I'm going to be covering this maybe more extensively depending on the information that comes out. This is three different sets of 300,000 Biden vote dumps late on election night in Virginia cannot be adequately explained or tied to final results, which actually I saw this transpiring as I was watching the election results come in. Surprisingly, Trump was winning Virginia, which has been known as kind of a weird blue/red state sometimes. It's a little confusing. Same thing with Maryland. Maryland's very blue, rather. But Virginia's a little bit more red because it's closer to West Virginia. So almost 1 million votes, because 3 times 300,000. So 900,000 votes were dumped late night, and they all came through for Biden at like an exponentially high rate, where it was the ratio was 9-1 or 10-1. These votes were 90% Biden by a substantial amount. And the real problem with this, and this is a Gateway Pundit piece, and I highly suggest you to check it out. I'm going to wait for more information to accumulate here on this. The county data, and it even sources the county and the state. The county data does not match the state data with how many people were voting. The rolls are showing and signifying that there's more votes counted in the state ending data than there was in each individual county. So each individual county didn't have as many votes if you added all the counties up, all the county data as came through the state system. It's a huge irregularity. It's not really surprising at this point. It's things that you can't talk about. You're not allowed to talk about it. So I'm probably not going to put any, or maybe I will put it in the description below. As always, every single thing I reference, it will be in the show notes in the description. Next, what I have, NBC, CNN, both paid $35,000 to John Sullivan for Capitol riot tapes. This is a Bongino.com piece. John Sullivan, if you do not remember, he's an Antifa/Black Lives Matter activist. He was in the Capitol building. He is the one that got the recorded footage of Ashley Babbitt getting shot by a police, or I don't know if it was a security guard that shot her. He was there on scene at the time. Apparently, CNN and NBC bought this videotape for $35,000 off of him. Now, Redditor sued in class action suit. So this is an interesting piece as well. This was, as I reported before, on Capitol Hill. I believe some of these Redditors were going up to Capitol Hill to be questioned by the big bad Congress. This is a Forbes piece. This is some of these big hedge funders, I believe, are the ones that are suing the guy that is behind all of it, and he has an awesome name on Reddit. It's called Deep Effing Value. Effing is in the F word. the one that rhymes with truck. Deep effing value was his I guess it's a handle on Reddit. He's 34-year-old securities broker, and he was the one that kind of not devised this, but he noticed, the hedge funders are hedging over their bets, and he let this be known to all of the people on Reddit, and once it was known, that's when everyone invested, and that's when this GameStop debacle happened, and it exploded in price, and a bunch of people made millions off of it, a bunch of retail investors. Very formidable. So he's being sued, this guy. I'm not exactly sure, because he cannot... There's certain rules when you're a broker, the things that you can and can't do in the space of the stock market. Apparently he violated those rules. This guy at this point, he's pretty set, so he probably, if I had to guess, he probably quit his job right after doing this, and now he's going to get sued for his money. I don't exactly know how, and they're suing the investment firm that he was working at that time, or if he still works there. If I were him, I'd be gone. I'd say, screw you guys, I'm out. Next, what I have is computer, and this is a very interesting piece here. Computer shop owner who obtained the Hunter Biden laptop is suing Twitter for defamation. And this is a Washington Examiner piece. This is because Twitter, as well as some other news sources, characterized this guy hacking Hunter Biden's laptop and stealing the information, whereas that's actually not true, and that is a defamation of his character, because you guys are alleging that he committed some sort of crime, or not even alleging, you're just saying it's hacked material, he hacked it, you're saying that the guy committed a crime, or the guy was involved in some sort of impropriety, and considering he's a computer shop owner, now people are not going to come to his computer shop and to get his laptop their laptops or their electronics fixed, and additionally, he was getting death threats. He had to actually close up the computer shop because of all of these statements from Twitter, as well as some other news sources, and that's why he's suing them for defamation. And good on him, he should. New York Assembly member, and this is hilarious, Cuomo, he says, Cuomo berated me, asked me to lie about alleged cover-up. Yahoo News piece, this is getting pretty big publicity. This guy was, he's a Congress member, or Assembly member in New York, in the state of New York, and I guess Cuomo wanted him to cover up what was going on in these nursing homes, and he went back at Cuomo, and then Cuomo started berating him, threatening him. He's like, doing the mafioso style. I made you. You can't do anything. I'm going to ruin your career. That whole thing. He came out. He said this to the media. And then Bill de Blasio, surprisingly, and they kind of don't really like each other, Andrew Cuomo and de Blasio. De Blasio comes out and goes, well, this is a regular occurrence. This is how Cuomo is. Everybody knows. Cuomo's a giant bully, which is pretty hilarious. And that's really it. Everything's falling apart and imploding on Cuomo right now at this point. His political career, depending on how the media decides to cover this, may actually end right here with this scandal. Next, Trump, and this is the very last one. Trump turned down a meeting with Nikki Haley, Daily Caller piece. Nikki Haley apparently, right after trashing Trump on Politico piece last week, she's asking Trump to meet with her, I guess, in Mar-a-Lago, and Trump told her to go screw, and good on him. And Nikki Haley, by turning your back on Donald Trump, the guy that placed you as the national security, I think she was the national security head of the UN, and he made you that very strong civil officer position. You are now, you turned your back, you stabbed the dude in the back, and that's it. Your hopes for running for president, I think, are futile. I don't think you have any chance now at this point. You really screwed yourself. So that's it for this one. I greatly appreciate everyone for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe the podcast. Let your friends know. Word of mouth is the only way this podcast gets around. I do a lot of data-driven analysis, a lot of articles. I'm not really opining on my opinions that much. I am still considered a political commentator. I don't consider myself a journalist by any standard, but I just report what is going on currently in the news, get you a little background information. Greatly appreciate it, and I will see you all on Monday. Everyone have a great weekend.